And here we are for another educational game. My opponent starts with the pawn to e4, and I'm going to play the Sicilian Defense c5. My opponent plays d4 very quickly, so I'll capture on d4. And now he plays c3, which is called the Gambit Morra. His idea is that in square of a capture, he can recapture with the knight and have better development. One knight developed, both bishops' diagonals open, while mine are blocked and the pawn is already in the center. And generally, players with white who play this gambit know the attacking variations. It's not easy to play for black. So I'm going to play in a different way. I'm going to play positionally. I'm going to play g6. I'm waiting for him to take on d4 so I can push the pawn to d5. And if these two pawns are exchanged, I'll create an isolated central pawn. Now you might say that he could push e5. Yes, that's true. But I also have ideas about that. And for now, it's him who's thinking, because he's not used to people not taking the pawn on c3. But I keep developing with bishop g7, knight c6 if he doesn't take. But he took. And now I see the pawn on d5. So if he takes, I could recapture. Maybe not right away, actually. I could play knight f6 first to take the pawn with the knight. Because if I recapture with the queen, I'm going to get hit. Knight c3. So if he had pushed to d5, we'll look at that in the analysis. I'll show you how you should play. But here, he took on d5. So if I recapture with the queen, there will be knight c3. I'm forced to move the queen, which is a bit unpleasant. That will help too much. His development. So I'm going to play knight f6 first, with the idea of taking the pawn on d5, not with the queen, but with the knight. He plays knight to c3, so now I can take. I have to watch out for bishop b5 check. But I can play knight to c6. I can even play bishop to d7, actually. Because if he takes my knight, I can take his bishop. So I'm going to take on d5. Let's see. Is he going to play? Bishop to b5. Check. But even knight c6 is possible on bishop takes, pawn takes. I have an isolated pawn on c6, but it supports my knight on d5 with my queen. And he has an isolated central pawn on d4, which my bishop will naturally target along the long diagonal. And then he won't have a bishop on the white square anymore. On bishop b5, knight c6, bishop takes, pawn takes, I'll still have mine. Now, mine can sometimes be placed on a6 along the diagonal, or after knight f3 on g4 to eliminate his knight, which is the defender of the pawn on d4 that I will soon attack with bishop g7. And even queen b6. So, there you have it. I brought him onto ground where he is not comfortable at all. Players who play the Gambit Morra, they play for open lines and a very tactical and dynamic game. Me, I take him into a positional structural game. And that generally they don't like, since that's not the purpose of their opening. They play bishop c4. So now he's attacking my knight on d5 twice. If I move my knight, I have to watch out for the sacrifice on f7. It doesn't seem to work, but I still have to be careful about it. If I play a6, he can take, and actually I'll be forced to recapture with the pawn, which will lead to an identical pawn structure. I'm also considering knight b6, attacking his bishop, maybe on bishop b5, then bishop d7. I'm also looking at capturing on c3. It's true that if I take on c3, it's a recapture with the pawn, and the pawn on d4 won't be isolated. But on the other hand, the c-file is semi-open in my favor. There will be the bishop left unprotected and the backward pawn on c3. But on which move? On c3, I need to watch out for queen f3 because then he'll threaten mate on f7. I'll play e6 and he can recapture with the queen, but he'll have an isolated pawn on d4. I don't know which is best. Between knight b6, knight takes c3, or maybe even other moves. But I'm going to play knight takes c3. Maybe that's not the best. I know he can reinforce the pawn d4, but after that I'll try to play on the c-file. Attack the bishop and the backward pawn, c3. Find some targets. So maybe not now, because after queen c7 immediately, he can play, for example, queen b3, protecting his bishop and attacking f7. I'll develop a bit first. Bishop g7 and castle very quickly. And after that, I'll play the structural game. For now, we have the same material balance. We each have a queen, two rooks, the pair of bishops, and a knight. But the pawn structure is asymmetrical. There are imbalances. He has 3 pawn islands against 2, one group here, a small one there, and an isolated pawn here, whereas I have 2 groups of pawn. So my pawn structure is healthier. I took castle quickly. And now I'm going to look to play on the c-file. That's the hardest part. You have to find the technique to know which move to play first. Do I start with queen c7? Do I play knight c6, then knight a5 to attack his bishop, and after I try to get on the square c4 with my queen? With moves like bishop 6, bishop b7, will it be bishop? g4, of course. The rooks will have to go on the c-file and the d-file. I think I'm going to play queen c7 first. All right, let's play queen c7. So I'm attacking the bishop on the white square and the pawn lurking. If I win the pawn on c3, I might be less well developed than my opponent. But the pawn on d4 will be weakened as a result. If he plays a move like queen bishop 3 to defend the bishop, he'll expose himself to king c6. Then k5, which will attack the queen and the bishop on c4. That's what he's playing, by the way, queen bishop 3. But if he had played queen e2, I might have played bishop g4 and queen d3, I don't know, maybe bishop g4, maybe something else. So here, he's putting pressure on f7, but the rook is defending. And I'm going to play knight c6, threatening knight f5. The queen moves, and I win the bishop. So here, he can't stay. Faced with this threat, he can't allow knight f5. He has to do something about that. Move the bishop, move the queen, I don't know. But he has to deal with the problem of knight a5. He plays bishop takes on f7. What did he see? He saw that after rook takes, he would follow up with knight g5. But I have e6, and the queen defends laterally. Well, here, I don't really have a choice. I'm going to have to take this call right now. So he's going to trade knight and bishop for rook and pawn. So I'm going to play e6. If he plays knight takes, bishop takes, and then he won't even have regained the exchange. So he's going to do it. Knight takes rook. And certainly queen takes back. So he has an extra rook, but I'll have an extra knight and a light-squared bishop. But he'll also have an extra pawn. So he'll have a rook and a pawn against a knight and a light-squared bishop. I'm emphasizing the light-squared bishop because that means I should try to find play on the light squares. That's where my advantage will be. Now he's hesitating, but if he hesitates too long, I'm going to move my rook. So in my opinion, he has to take the rook right away. If he goes knight takes, I go bishop takes, queen takes. And he'll be down a knight for 2 pawns. So that's not enough. So he has to go for the exchange. He has to take the rook. And he just took on f7. So should I recapture with the queen or the king? I don't really want to stay in this face-off. So I'm going to recapture with the queen. So he has the rook and 1 extra pawn. And I have a bishop on white squares and a knight. So I need to manage to play on the white squares. If I manage to find play on the white squares, I'll have 2 more pieces than him to play on the white squares. Well, 2 more minor pieces. But what can I actually do on the white squares? His pawn on g2 is very important. Otherwise, obviously the h3 square, the f3 square, those are entry squares, plus the diagonals that are opening up. But it's not easy for me to go and attack the pawn on g2. I can play b6, bishop b7 to already put some pressure. And then try to get through with the queen, queen f5, queen g4, for example. To go attack g2, try to provoke him to advance. But he'll probably play f3, blocking the bishop with that move to f3 instead. Otherwise, I can try to take control of the square. c4, a weak square on a white square. That is, try to play. For example, b6, bishop a6, I attack his rook, then knight f5, I attack his queen, and I enter on c4. Knight and bishop control the square, and the rooks can be placed on the c-file. I said the rooks, but I only have 1. They can be placed on the c-file to support my piece on c4 and maybe put pressure on the pawn. There's still c3, but above all, it's stuck in his position. Ideally, by the way, it would be to put a knight on c4 and a bishop on d5, or vice versa, to have both pieces. So I think the best is still the knight on c4 and the bishop on d5 to target the diagonal. As for my bishop on the dark squares, I don't really know how to play it for now. We'll see. But anyway, for me, it's not on the dark squares that I need to play, it's on the light squares. because on the squares of the dark color, I have a bishop on the dark squares, just like he does. But on the light squares, I have two minor pieces that can play. And he doesn't have any minor piece that can play on a light square. So that's where I'll have the greatest advantage. He plays bishop g5. The bishop is unprotected, so we take a look, because tactically it can sometimes be interesting. I can attack it, but what does that get me? Here, not much. The problem with playing b6 and making the bishop leave the protection of the pawn on 6 is that he'll end up putting a rook on 1 and attacking the pawn on e6 twice here. For example, b6, he'll put a rook on e1, and I won't be able to move my bishop because I'll lose the pawn. And if I play bishop d7, I lose the pawn on b7. So it's not easy. I'm still going to play b6. That way, it will allow my bishop to move without having to protect the pawn on b7. If I have to play bishop d7, I'll play bishop d7. It's not very active, but oh well. I could play k5, attack his queen and place the bishop, maybe on c6 to put it on d5 afterwards. Will I have time? I don't know. But in any square, with bishop d7, I'll also have rook e8 to defend e6. So I'm going to play b6. I'm leaving the knight unprotected, so I have to be careful that it doesn't get attacked. But I have ways to defend it. Actually, it's not a big deal. So what bothers me is a rook coming to e1 and attacking that pawn on e6. I'd be forced to play bishop d7. But it's okay, bishop d7 anyway. Bishop d7, rook e8, knight a5, bishop c6. He plays pawn d5. What did he see? I don't see what he saw. The queen is protecting. Plus, that frees my light squared bishop. I take on d5. I don't see his idea. Maybe I'll discover it now. He plays rook e1. He sacrificed the pawn to try to open the file. But he can't get in on a7. There's the knight. If he comes in on a8, queen takes, that diverts my queen from protecting. Queen takes d5 check, but I can play bishop. e6, everything is protected. The queen defends the knight. So I don't see the point for him. The question now is where I should place my bishop. Bishop b7, that's a bit passive because it will only defend, but bishop e6 as well. So I don't see a very active square for my bishop. Actually, with bishop e6, I can threaten the d4 push. That's what's interesting. So I'm still going to play f6. I'm threatening d4. An attack on the squares that are white, Saddam. Afterwards, on d4, he'll move his queen to counterattack the knight. In any square cut, you can see that the opening variation I chose threw him off. He wanted to play a Gambit Morra against me with his attacking plans. And in the end, he had to play with structural weaknesses. A rather strategic position, as he was looking for a tactical position in the opening. And so he played queen b5. Counterattack on the knight. I have many possible moves, I don't even know which ones to play. I'm even thinking of queen d7. If my knight moves, everything is protected. I can go and trade queens, I have the material advantage now. So I'm going to play queen d7. My rook isn't playing, I'll soon involve it in the fight. So either on rook e8, bishop f7 to propose the exchange of a pair of rooks, or in c8 on column c. Now the pawn c3 is on prize. With a nice fork, by the way. If I took it before, I would still lose the knight. And when he took the knight, he was attacking my rook. So now he plays rook e2. So after bishop takes c3, he won't be able to play rook e1 because I would take his rook. However, after bishop takes c3, he'll play rook c1, attacking my bishop and then the knight behind it. But I can protect with d4. That's possible. Why not? I'll do that. Besides, the d4 push will free up my bishop on the white square, even though it's true that the pawn will prevent my black square bishop from coming back, but I think it's fine. And then I have a passed pawn that's advancing, so it's hard to push it further because the bishop would be hanging, but still, if I play d3, I attack his rook, so it's still possible to push this pawn forward. So now, he does have an extra rook, sure, but I have a white square bishop, a knight, and an extra pawn. Earlier I was down a pawn, now I'm up a pawn. He's a player who doesn't pay much attention to his pawns. He plays queen to d3. Here, maybe queen to f7 to support the arrival of the bishop on c4 and also to attack the pawn on a2. Playing the white square is fine. Queen f7. I'm not protecting the knight now. We'll see if he attacks it again. If he does, I'll play bishop, d5. Or maybe come to defend with the rook. For example, queen b5. I defend with the rook, and after bishop c4 to attack his rook and his queen. But now he doesn't have much time left. Time's up. There it is. He plays queen b5, coming back. By the way, I can play bishop. c4, he takes my knight, but if I take his rook, he takes my rook with check. So I'll play rook c8. I protect my knight, and now I threaten bishop c4. And there you go, he lost on time. So the computer gives me 92% accuracy versus 84, but we're still going to take a look at this opening. Because I didn't explain everything to you during the game, so after e4, I play the Sicilian defense, c5. He plays d4, so I take and he plays. c3, this is what's called the Morra Gambit. And if I take and he recaptures with the knight, he'll have the pawn in the center, which can destabilize my knight. If I go out to f6, he'll have his pushes with e5. He has the knight on c3, the bishop that can come to c4, the bishop on c1, which can have lots of good squares, the knight on f3, kingside castling. Yes, he's down a pawn, but he has a lot of play. Whereas I have nothing developed, he already has the pawn, the knight, and both bishops diagonals. I have a lot of trouble playing against this type of position with black. That's why I didn't accept his pawn and I played the move, g6. The idea is that when he recaptures on d4, I can play d5 to try to weaken his pawn structure. He took on d5. So in this square, I play knight to f6 to win back the d5 pawn and then play against the isolated d4 pawn. We'll see what happens next since this is the game. But if he had played e5, how should you play? Actually, in that square, I should try to attack the backward d4 pawn. So it's hidden because the pawn on d5 prevents my queen from directly attacking d4. But I can attack it with knight to c6. And after knight to f3, which defends, bishop to g4, the pin. And knight to h6, then knight to f5 to attack again several times. And sometimes even the move b6. The problem is, if I play knight to c6 immediately, he can pin me and even trade the bishop for the knight so that I have less ability to attack the d4 pawn. So the best move, according to the computer, is a 6 in this position. To prepare knight to c6. And if the opponent plays h3 to prevent bishop to g4 after knight to f3, you can play knight to c6 to attack, for example, knight to f3. Here, I've already tried several things because I've found myself in this position quite a few times. I've tried knight to h6 with knight to f5 to put pressure on d4, but it's not enough. Even with d6, he's able to defend, and the knight on f5 can sometimes be pushed back by the g4 advance. I've also tried bishop f5 to trade my light-squared bishop for the knight. If I play e6, my light-squared bishop just gets stuck on c8. And if the opponent plays knight to c3, sometimes it's even possible to put the bishop on e4. Because after the captures, the pawn recaptures, I attack the knight, which also opens the file to attack the pawn on d4. So you don't have to do it right away. Sometimes you can prepare it with the bishop. g7, but that could be an idea. Bishop f5, bishop e4. The computer, on the other hand, prefers bishop. g7, right away. And after knight to c3, for example, play f6, going to attack the pawn on e5 3 times. If there's a capture, it develops. For example, bishop e2, kingside castling. And there, on the semi-open e-file, it's rather in his favor. I have weak squares, a backward pawn, so I have to try to play e5. For that, you can play queen d6 to support the push to e5. Or even play knight e4, still with the idea that after knight takes, you recapture with the pawn, which drives away the knight on f3, and exposes the pawn d4 to attacks from the queen, the bishop, and the knight. So after the d5 push, if he had played e5, that's kind of what I was preparing, the attack on d4. He took on d5, so I play knight f6 to recapture with the knight and not with the queen. He plays knight c3, now I take. Because if he takes, it doesn't bother me. Not to recapture with the queen, since the queen can no longer be attacked by his knight. He plays bishop to c4. The best move, according to the computer, is to play knight to b6. Remember, I hesitated between knight b6 and knight. Takes on c3. And the second best move is to capture on c3. That's what I did. Then we take the bishop on g7. That's normal. Knight on f3. kingside castling, even though the computer says I could have played. Queen c7 right away. Kingside castling and now queen c7. That's the best way to continue. He plays queen b3. The computer advises rather bishop b3, even if it loses the pawn on c3. The line given by the computer is bishop. b3, queen takes c3, and now bishop. g5 to counterattack on e7. It's my move, of course. He's a pawn down. The d4 pawn is weak, but on the other hand, he has good development. And according to the computer, this development for white will allow them to recover the lost pawn. In the position, he didn't play that. Bishop b3, he played queen b3, and then knight c6. And he's in trouble because knight a5 is coming. So he can't develop. He has to move the bishop or the queen in this position. And for me, that's a very good sign for my development, because after that, I can have bishop g4, which attacks the knight. If he captures, it destroys his castling. The rooks will be connected. They can be placed on the c-file to attack c3. Now, the black position becomes better, and he decided to trade his bishop and his knight for a rook and a pawn. But it's a trade that's to his disadvantage. He plays bishop takes f7, rook takes knight on g5, I play e6, and then knight takes f7, queen takes f7. Why is this trade to his disadvantage? From a material point of view, it's 6 points against 6 points. Rook and pawn are worth 6 points, just like knight and bishop, 6 points. But it was 2 pieces that were active in the position. His bishop and his knight were 2 developed pieces. So he traded 2 developed pieces for my rook and my pawn, which weren't really developed. And above all, these rooks don't have any range of action for now. There aren't even any fully open files. There are half-open files, what we call semi-open files, but there are no completely open files. So the rooks aren't really able to express themselves. And I have the pair of bishops, and he doesn't really have any threats. So he develops his bishop, but the bishop is kind of developing without any real purpose, actually. It's not aiming at anything, so it's not targeting anything. And I can keep developing with b6 to bring out my bishop. And now he plays d5. So obviously he gives me back a pawn. But if he had played, for example, rook f to e1, which is what the computer recommends, well, now the computer suggests knight f5, attacking the queen. It's true that the knight is on the edge, but the idea for the knight is to eventually come to c4. And for example, if the queen comes to b4, the bishop goes to b7 on a beautiful diagonal. The rook can come to c8 or be placed on d5 to allow the knight to arrive, which is what I wanted. If he plays c4, he loses d4 now. And so, you see, in this position, there is absolutely no problem here for black. I'm not going to show you the end of the game. You've seen it. It wasn't very interesting since he never managed to find any counterplay to make up for his material deficit. Material. Well, I hope the game was enjoyable, instructive, and entertaining. You can give me a thumbs up if that's the square, leave comments, share the video, and support the channel. Goodbye, everyone.